as the title says, I'm talking about the songbird diversity in Cessnock. And it's actually a very, very important area. These dry forests are incredibly diverse. That there is a brown tree creeper. So when we're talking about songbirds, we're basically talking about bush birds. I fit in as the local. I'm going to tell you all about the importance of the Cessnock Forest. And these forests are essentially just a piece of the western slopes, I guess, that has been plonked close to the coast. I mean, some of these forests are only 30 k's from the coast, but you get many birds in these forests and even plants that if you kept driving further west, that you probably wouldn't strike again until you got west of the divide. And there's a very strong western influence in these forests, which actually really drives home the significance and the diversity of birds in the area. So many threatened and declining species live in these forests. And as was mentioned before, 68 threatened entities actually occur here, of which about 35 or so are birds. And as I mentioned before, in the context of the Twitchathon, these forests really are the go-to place for finding some of these otherwise difficult to find birds. So for bird watchers, we always chat about, what did you see, down in the forest around Tamalpin last week, because people are always in these forests looking for birds because they're just so incredibly important and full of birds. So these forests are nationally significant for a couple of critically endangered species, being the regent honeyeater and swift parrot. I'll talk more about those later. It's also the regional stronghold for birds that are otherwise disappearing in many parts of their range. Brown tree creeper, I've put a bracket there saying locally endangered. It's a bird that actually seems to be struggling in the area, so it's kind of restricted to a few. It's very localised. It's restricted to a few small patches. It's holding its own, but pretty much every other threatened species that I've listed there, every other threatened species that I've listed there are really still quite common in the area. Things like grey crown babblers might be familiar to people because they even occur in golf courses and backyards and things. They're doing really well, and also it's not just about threatened birds. There's a number of birds such as the painted button quail, which we saw earlier. It's not a threatened species, but it's a species that only occurs in the highest quality forests, and they're quite common in these forests. And you can tell by going out and checking for platelets, which are the small little marks that these birds leave behind. The forests are full of them. And you don't see that in forests where there's noisy miners and other birds that have infiltrated. You only see that in the high quality forests. So why are these forests so important? Why are there so many birds there? Well, it's probably a combination of three things. Most importantly, I think, is the fact that it sits within the Hunter Valley. So the Hunter Valley is a very broad valley. It stretches a long way west, and I will expand on this in a minute. So it's situated there close to the coast as well. So it's got that western influence, like I mentioned before, things that have spilt over from the gap in the Great Divide, and in almost a sub-coastal area. And it's a remnant of a forested area that has been largely cleared. So I'll also talk about the context about why the forests were cleared. And it's actually a really, really good story. So we need to think more broadly out of Cessnock for a little while. So I'm going to talk about the western influence within the Hunter Valley more broadly. So you can just make out there that this is the Great Dividing Range set on the east coast of Australia, and the Hunter Valley swings a long way west. The Great Divide literally swings west and around Woodland and along the Liverpool Range there. And so Woodland sits at the top of the valley. It's as far inland as Gunnedah. So Gunnedah is on the Liverpool Plains. So it's always going to have some western influence. The fact that the longitude is so far west, but not only that, there's also what they call a gap in the Great Dividing Range. So the Great Dividing Range is actually at a very low point at the top of the Hunter Valley, only 470 metres near Woodland. Also, the Goulburn River, I think, is an important part of the story. So the Goulburn River is this area here. So this is the Merriwa Plateau. This is the Wallamai National Park, and this is Sandy Hollow, Denman, all that sandstone country. So the Goulburn River actually makes up 40% of the catchment of the Hunter Valley. And actually, you know, there's some cause for actually the name of the valley could have been the Goulburn Valley. When you look at an aerial photo of the confluence of the Hunter into the Goulburn where they meet just south of Denman, you can see that the Hunter actually looks like it's the tributary of the Goulburn. You know, for all money, it looks like this is the main river and this is the tributary that joins it. But apparently it's something to do with the amount of flow or the amount of rivers that feed the Hunter River is why it was named the Hunter Valley. So there's a close-up of the confluence, and yeah, the Goulburn River I think has had a profound impact on the flora and fauna of the Hunter Valley, sort of fed by that really dry sandstone country. And the Merriwar Plateau is actually it's geologically aligned with the Gunnedah Basin, like black soil, but it's in a coastal catchment, so it's important to remember. So this kind of gives a bit of a visual of that gap in the divide that I'm talking about. So this is the Merriwar Plateau, but the gap is really here around Ulan. And I like telling the story about when you take a drive from Ulan towards Golgong here, you go through a place called Cope, and you drive along and it's just a flat piece of road. You're just driving in the countryside, and then all of a sudden you see a sign that says Great Dividing Range, 470 metres, and you think, how on earth can this be the top of the Great Divide? And that is the gap. And so that really sort of, you know, it's a good visual, good way of actually prompting you to think, wow, I am actually in the middle of this gap in the Great Dividing Range. You can see how the valley really broadens towards the coast. These are the basalt areas in the sea of sandstone that were cleared for agriculture because they were the only places that were worthwhile clearing. This is the black soil country of the Merriwar Plateau. And the Cessnock Forests, you can see, sitting right up there, up against the Sugarloaf Range, hemmed in by the Wattigans and the Sugarloaves, right next to the coast. So the bird assemblage in these forests are quite similar to what's in here and also what's out here west of the Great Divide. So it's the lack of the physical barrier. It's also I guess that's enabled things to move in. Potentially, there's also the drying effect of the westerly winds. I know Lucas has got a theory about that, and I think it's actually quite valid. I mean, over a long time, and you know, Joe mentioned that I run pelagic birdwatching trips, and it's a constant frustration of mine that how many trips get cancelled because of the westerlies in the Hunter. We just seem to get howling westerlies quite often. Yeah, I think I missed this slide. So Thomas Mitchell, when he came through here in 1831, and he saw the Hunter as it was originally, and he described it as park-like, with light forest and grassy glades and birds of many kinds in the open forest. So it's obvious that this place was never covered in rainforest or wet sclerophyll. It was always kind of open woodland, which suits these woodland birds which have declined, which I will talk about soon. It's also the only place, or the only coastal catchment in New South Wales that's home to things like river redgums and weeping miles, again, things that you associate with west of the Great Dividing Range. There's even claims of mulga and brigalow in some parts of the Hunter as well. They're historic records. Some examples of western species that push into the Hunter Valley. This is using some maps using Birdlife Atlas data. So this is the Hunter Valley here, this is the Hunter River, and this is the Goulburn River. White-browed babblers, really common in the Upper Hunter, black-eared cuckoos. Again, you can see that really only pushing east of the divide in the Hunter Valley. Singing honeyeater is a really interesting one. This is a bird of more sort of open, low acacia shrubland. It's a bird that if you're driving west, you won't start seeing them till you get west of Dubbo. But for some reason, there's a population around Ulan in Dirigiri, that sort of area, south of Cassillis, and they're actually breeding there. They're not there by accident. It's quite remarkable. And when you go out there and you see these birds and you see the habitat they're in, it does remind you of some of that sort of really open acacia country. Painted honeyeater, another bird that's more associated with western habitats. It breeds. It's a specialist. It feeds on mistletoe fruits. And here's one here sitting in grey mistletoe, and that's one of the favourite mistletoes that it occurs in. Its host plants are acacias, are the wattles. And it's no coincidence that if you look at the distribution of the mistletoe using PlantNet, it matches quite nicely with the distribution of painted honeyeaters. And here again, you can see this is the Hunter Valley. It's the only place where this is the top of the Hunter here. It's the only place where they both spill in. So I reckon there's some really important stories there about there being habitat and then the fauna actually using that habitat. And this is nothing new. Pat Burke published a paper back in 1969 called The Western Element in Hunter Valley Birdlife. It's a really, really interesting paper to read. He talks about galahs being a very western bird that was only then just starting to inhabit the Hunter. A lot has changed since this paper was published, but still the same messages apply. Okay, so for context, we can see that there's a western influence in the Hunter. So what about Cessnock down here close to the coast? I'm going to jump straight to a very extreme example, a spotted bowerbird. Now, again, this is a bird that if you're driving along the Kamilaroi Highway, you won't start seeing these guys till about Narrabri. But for some reason, there is a small population that seems to persist especially around North Rothbury. There are some records from around Munghorn Gap, again at the top of the valley near Ulan. This photo here was actually taken at North Rothbury. And you can see there, using the Atlas data, it's a very, very western species. So this photo was taken on Hebburn Road back in 2013. I actually took that photo not knowing what the bird was at the time. It was on a maximum zoom. I just saw this bird fly in. And I said to my brother, it could have been a spotted bowerbird, but just the last place I expected to see a spotted bowerbird was in the forest. But at the time, there were budgerigars in the valley. Now, that was part of an eruption after they bred inland, and I think we're probably likely to see budgies again, probably next year after this big rain event inland. Things like black kites and budgerigars are going to breed up, and when they do, they push coastally when life gets tough again. But the only place that they arrived that wasn't sort of very open habitat, the only forested area that the budgies arrived in 2013 were in the Tamalpin woodlands. So just the birds really vote with their feet sometimes, or with their wings. So this photo really drives it home. This is a spotted bowerbird's bower. So these, again, it's not by accident that these birds, they're not escapees. This photo was taken somewhere, the fellow can't remember exactly where it was taken, but they were taken in the Cessnock area. So there's spotted bowerbirds in the Cessnock region. Fascinating. Why are they here? Well, there's, again, you can bring it back to habitat. There's a couple of plants that are, again, normally found in, on the western slopes and inland New South Wales. Both these plants occur in the Cessnock area. You can actually see that these fruits here are quite possibly one of the quandong fruits or mock olive fruits. So it's a habitat thing. So the western influence, you don't get birds by coincidence. They need the habitat, and there are a number of plants that have their eastern limit in the Cessnock area. These include white box, very famous eucalypt, bull oak, all these different things, cypress, pines as well, and saltbush. So as we saw with the painted honeyeater, if you've got the habitat, the birds will be there quite often. Western Gerigony, another western bird that occurs in the Cessnock area, or has its eastern limit in the Cessnock area. Grey-crowned babblers, they do occur in the Clarence Valley as well. The Clarence Valley, to some extent, is the poor cousin of the Hunter in this context. They do have a slight amount of western influence as well. But grey-crowned babblers elsewhere in New South Wales are really struggling. They're actually listed as endangered in Victoria, and they're in a lot of trouble. But they're doing quite well in the Cessnock area, and I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the grey-crowned babblers. Black-chinned honeyeater, as appeared on the flyer for tonight's talk. Again, a bird that's normally hard to find. Bird watchers actually struggle finding black chins in a lot of places, but they're reasonably common, especially in the Tamalpin woodlands, and they breed locally as well. So it's not just the fact that there's this western influence, it's the fact that it's a remnant, and that's a really important point. And when you look at the whole Hunter Valley, it's actually probably the largest remnant forest that is left on the valley floor. Here's a visual here. You can just make out where we are in context of the towns, Cessnock and Curry. This is Ellalong Lagoon here, and we're looking over the Wattigans, looking north there. So looking east here this is the Singleton Army Base, which we loosely kind of include sometimes in the Cessnock Forest, generally as far west as Broke, but the Singleton Army Base is a very important area for woodland birds as well, and for vegetation. So I mentioned before the really great story about why these forests are still here, and I think it's fantastic that it's actually coal mining to some extent. We have to thank for the fact that these forests were retained, because the forests were actually needed to support the coal mining that happened. So the timber was needed for the pit props and was needed for the railway sleepers, and a lot of these state forests were used for that purpose. So we have the mines to thank for the fact that these forests remain. Otherwise, if the mines were never there, these forests may have just been cleared and there'd be cows running all over them. So I think it's a good story to tell in the context of the coalfields. So just for context about the story of temperate woodlands and woodland birds, it's a guild of birds that are threatened across the board, because up to 85% of the forests within temperate Australia, which is basically that polygon there, have been lost. And within that 15% that's left, a lot of that is actually fragmented. So wherever you've got the remnants of that 15% that aren't impacted by grazing or edge effects, that's where you get a lot of these threatened species. And we're actually seeing declines in some of the more common birds that we take for granted, such as Jackie Winters. It really is an across-the-board thing, the decline of woodland birds. So these are the threatened entities in the Cessnock area. So I was a bit overestimating with the birds. They're 27, still a significant number. And it's fascinating that there are things like yellow-bellied gliders on the floor, and they're normally something you would associate with wet, tall forests. They're in the Wattigans, but they're found on the valley floor here, which is really fascinating. And nearly all of the vegetation in Cessnock on the valley floor is endangered because of the fact that most of the rest of it has been cleared. So it really is a very significant place. So when there's a diversity in the vegetation, there's always going to be a diversity in the birds, and it's actually an incredible area for the diversity of eucalypts. 43 species have been recorded. 4 of those are yet to be described to science. Okay, so I did mention before that the swift parrot and regent honeyeater, nationally critically endangered. The lower hunter forests are one of the most important areas for both of these. And the regent honeyeaters, most importantly, will breed here. Anywhere that regent honeyeaters breed is a very important thing, and the area has been recognised internationally as an important bird area under an international campaign. So this is the habitat that they occur in, the lower hunter spotted gum ironbark forest. Not much to look at visually, but extremely diverse in its plants and animals. Swift parrots have been here. Deb Saunders wrote in 14 years ago, she wrote that at the time, the swift parrots had displayed the longest and most significant site fidelity on the mainland Australia. And within the ensuing 14 years, I think swifties have turned up 12 out of those 14 years. We've had about 300 of them arrive again this year because of the spotted gum flaring. So it's a very important place for swift parrots. Regent honeyeaters are critically endangered. They're probably closer to extinction than swift parrots. There's probably only about 300 or 400 left. And a lot of money is getting spent on regent honeyeaters. Things have gotten so desperate that we're breeding them in Taronga Zoo or in many zoos. First of all, to make sure they don't go extinct totally, but also with the view to releasing them back in the wild. So we're actually supplementing the wild population with captive bred birds, and the things are pretty desperate when that happens. There's a photo there I took in 2012. There's 24 regent honeyeaters in that photo. That's taken at Quarraballong. You won't see that anywhere else these days. Hopefully, as time progresses and BirdLife are doing their work with regents, that we will actually start seeing things like that again, but pretty much the Hunter and the Capity Valley is the only place you'll see that. So you're probably aware of the hunter economic zone. There was a paper published a couple of years ago about a very significant breeding event that occurred there. Probably the biggest recruitment of juvenile regent honeyeaters into the population in the last 10 to 20 years. And you can see here the concentration of nests within the industrial area. So, regent honeyeaters are a bit of a local champion for conservation. So the stronghold, fair enough, at the moment is still the Kapiti Valley, north of Lithgow, but the Kapiti Valley is under a major threat from a number of things, such as noisy miners. It's very fragmented. It's a very rural landscape. So the Kapiti Valley may only be the stronghold for regent honeyeaters for a short time into the future. It's also a bit more susceptible to drought. A lot of their breeding habitat is also senescing. So as time progresses, my feeling is that the forest here in Cessnock will actually become more important because they're closer to the coast, they're less susceptible to drought, and the fact that they're still forests proper, there's a few tracks going through them, but it's not a fragmented landscape. So we need to actually retain that and keep these forests unfragmented and noisy miner free. So I'm just going to finish now with a quick point about the wood swallows, the original swaggy. I like to refer to these as wood swallows. I think Tim might mention them in his talk, but they're a really fascinating group of birds. Brush-tipped tongues. They will actually take nectar, but they generally feed on aerial insects. But these birds are classic Australian birds that wander around. They always seek out the best patches of habitat. You often will see them flying over during westerly winds. We may not see a lot of them this year because conditions are so good inland. One of them being the white-browed wood swallow and the other being the masked wood swallow. So as I said, they migrate generally, but they are prone to wandering and will hone in on the best habitats. And the Tamalpam woodlands is one place that these birds, they just seem to funnel back in there year after year. It's incredible. There's quite a lot of places in the Hunter Valley where these birds could actually settle, but it's always the Tamalpam woodlands that these birds always gravitate back to. So it's the only place in the whole Hunter Valley where masked wood swallows have bred. And, I think there's a story to be told when, we suspect that the area is important and has great habitat, but when the birds actually prove that by coming back here year after year, I think that proves it. 2014 was one of those years that the wood swallows, they weren't reported anywhere along the coast. They stuck to out west. Even on the Twitchathon, when we were in the Mallee, we were still too far east for the wood swallows there. We struggled to find them. Come back on the Sunday, and lo and behold, we find them in Hez, in the Tamalpam woodlands breeding. So I don't know. I think the wood swallows are not threatened, but they really do sum up why this place is so important. So it's a biodiverse area. It's in one of the largest remnants. It's within the Hunter Valley in a sub-coastal setting with a westerly influence. So it's those things added up that add up to make it an important area. So I'm hoping that I've convinced you that songbirds are the key to the Cessnock area being recognised as a biodiversity hotspot. Thanks very much.